Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Welcome back to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. Today, we are once again live from Autodesk University, and I have the pleasure of being joined by Amy Bunszel, the Executive Vice President of Architecture, Engineering, and Construction Design at Autodesk, and Aaron Perry, the Head of Digital Design at Allford Hall Monaghan Morris. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I am incredibly excited to dive a bit deeper into BIM, data, the access, the future of the construction industry. We got a lot of cool stuff coming up. How are you both feeling today?
Very good.
Feeling great.
All right. Well, we'll get straight into it. Amy, I have a question that I'm going to kick you first. Can you share your thoughts on the original vision for BIM and what was anticipated in the early days, and compare that a little bit with the reality of what's happening today?
Absolutely. So BIM stands for Building Information Modeling. And as I understand it, in the early days, it was all about having a central coordinated model so that everyone in a project could work together to achieve project outcomes. Now, that all sounds great, but I think when it started, it was very heavily focused on the architecture part of the cycle and the design. But as we all know, you need to, design something, build it, operate it. So over the years, BIM has expanded, and it's kind of got some cracks, in particular in how data transfers between those phases. There's a lot more stakeholders on projects. Projects have gotten more complicated. So I think it needs a bit of a refresh.
I appreciate that, overview and that high level of, where we're at today. And I'd love to hear your perspective too. Like, where are we doing, or how are we doing today as an industry? And, where are we headed in the future here?
I think there's a bit in between about incentives versus mandate. So obviously there have been BIM mandates, and that has progressed to some extent people's adoption of BIM. And I think incentives were there for especially from an architectural perspective, for people to engage with the process, collaborate their models with other people. Again, I think we've probably found the balance between those two things right now. And as Amy hints towards, now it's about refining that, improving that, and improving on things like the data flow between people.
I appreciate that baseline. And there's so much opportunity right now, I think, as far as where our industry is headed with regards to BIM and how we're managing our data and everything that we're able to draw from that. Can you, Aaron, can you tell me a little bit more? What are some of these common challenges that you're seeing tied to BIM data, and just what are people struggling with? Where are the gaps?
Yeah, so earlier this year, with a bunch of other architectural practices, both across the UK and the Nordic regions and in North America, we looked at refining a future design software specification, and some of the topics within that were all challenges for all of us, both as architects, engineers, constructors. Predominantly, one of the key points about that was cloud-based granular access to data at an entity or component system level, not being necessarily tied within an application or within a file format. We also very much all talked about hybrid compute. We now have modern hybrid workers all over the world. And so those people being tied to desktop computers is continues to be tricky. We're all dealing with larger contexts of data, larger scales of data, greater definition, levels of detail. Our data footprints when working on existing buildings is even greater as we look at things like laser scans and point clouds and so on. So being able to interact with that amount of data at a context and scale is really, really important for us, and something we think there's an opportunity for in the future. And I think it's important also to think about designing and constructing responsibly. So making sure that we are evaluating existing building constructions. A lot of the work that we do as an architectural practice is in central London, and we spend a lot of time evaluating what we can retain from the existing building fabric in order for us to design responsibly. And it's important, again, we recognize that as a challenge. All of our tools need to be able to engage with that in the right way. Understanding the constraints of modern methods of construction, prefabrication, and offsite whilst designing is really important. I appreciate it's a really complex area, and I know there's some challenges to modern methods of construction, prefabrication, and offsite. And I don't think we help that by designing things without the awareness of what some of those constraints are and the inefficiency of construction when we have to kind of keep going back around to evaluate those choices. Probably finally, just about automation and intelligence and really understanding how we can learn more efficiently and effectively from a project to project basis, automate mundane and repetitive tasks. And as you're probably hearing across AU this week, does that mean less jobs? And I think actually the problem is that we see people are studying for 7 years to become qualified architects. They're going into firms and then they're realizing that it's quite mundane, repetitive tasks that they're dealing with. And I think the way that we can have enough people in the industry going forward is by automating those mundane, repetitive tasks. So the people we've got left can focus on the architecture, the design, delivering great buildings responsibly, and to all those other points.
You're really speaking my language here, and I'm so excited as we continue to augment the way our teams are working. And to your point, all those boring things that make somebody go, I don't know if I want to work in architecture or construction because I'm going to sit here and do material takeoffs for 16 hours or something. That's painful. Nobody wants to do that. So if we can use technology to augment and change that and let people focus on the things that they're excited about and that they're fun about, it's a totally different narrative. Amy, I'd love your take on that as well.
For sure. So much of what you said resonates with me. And I think there's a thread of data that goes through everything that you just talked about, everything from the increased complexity that we see, 10 years ago, what was in the Revit model is not what there's so much more that goes in there today. But we also know that something like 85% of data that's accumulated during the process goes unused. And so there's a huge amount of value there that can help with some of these outcomes like sustainability and automation and things that will improve the situation for everyone.
Yeah, I think we're starting to have this narrative where our contractors and everybody who's touching the AEC industry, they're starting to ask the right questions. The progressive mindset is very encouraging and exciting because if I look back, 2020, and there was some struggle and challenging years mixed in there, of course, but if you look at that era and just the questions that were being asked then versus now, as we got kind of nudged through this digital transformation, I think at a pace that many of our AEC friends weren't ready for, or at least not terribly excited about at times. Now we're, the silver lining is there and we're far more mature in our digital journey. And I think it's giving us opportunity that we didn't have before. And that's what I'm really excited about. So Amy, I've got another question for you. And I'd like to lean in more on that data focus that we've just teed up. So thank you for doing that so tactfully. How is our data right now moving through the AEC ecosystem today? And in an ideal world, how should it be? Like, how does it differ from what's happening and where we should be?
I would say the worst case, at every step of the way, if data doesn't get handed over, it gets recreated. And so you have a lot of people that introduces human error. It costs a lot of money. It creates some of these mundane tasks that people don't want to be doing. So I think that's kind of the worst case. What I see on the best case is, people who maybe they were forced into the digital world, but now they're taking control of it and they are making processes and systems that work for their company, their partners, their customers, and they're able to, in a, highly controlled way where they control what gets shared, kind of pass data through the ecosystem and even bring, those constructors up to the front of the process so that all the stakeholders can be participating in early decisions and have big impacts on the projects.
I appreciate that context. And Aaron, I'd really love if you could share your perspective there as well, how it aligns and where you see that data journey kind of looking like and where it should be.
Absolutely. So again, from the last 5, 6, 7 years, we have been creating even more data, but typically in proprietary file formats, and those have been slightly challenging for wide groups of stakeholders to engage with. So, putting the magnifying glass on architects, we make incredibly large models that contain everything. But sometimes the audience to some of those models, they just need a part of that. And so when we talk about things like a data model where it's at a granular level of detail, where a single entity or package of entities, a construction package of, the example I often use is internal doors, for example. There is a subcontractor or a subconsultant there that just needs access to that information. And sometimes we've created these barriers by these large files that are quite difficult for them to use. Obviously, there are other barriers like skills and technology, access to hardware in order to be able to interact with files of that size. And so I think when we start looking at separating the data out and being able to exchange and collaborate and share that information in a controlled, rigorous manner, cloud-enabled, we'll have a much wider, a more diverse, and a more equitable audience that can engage with that data. When all those barriers are removed, we can work with small firms, large firms, firms in regions we've never traditionally been able to work in. I think, again, to the point about equity, we really will see more people able to engage with construction that have always had those barriers in the past.
I love this narrative shift that we're seeing right now, and it empowers so many different folks as they start building out their technology stacks and the way we collaborate. And I think that model of just design, bid, build, operate, and everybody being so segmented from each other is starting to shift. And I'm a nerd, so I like things like integrated project delivery and all these other delivery methods, and really looking at how we can be more innovative and how we collaborate. But I feel like this feedback loop that we're in, there's so much knowledge that the architects have that can be offered to the contractors, the design loop. When we give more channels and opportunities for that collaboration, I think everybody wins. And we've not necessarily been structured to be able to do that well. And I think our move into the cloud and this focus on data really cements our abilities to kind of, muddy those swim lanes a little bit and start being, a little bit friendlier across the, the pond, because there's been some contention in the past that's unfortunate, but it's there too. And I think we're, on the right track, and I'm really encouraged by it.
I think another important thing for me is the comment about granular data, because in the current state, a lot of times it's monolithic data that you're getting. So you might not have the skill sets, the right tools to access that data. So I think granularity coupled with standards, coupled with just lowering some of those barriers to access really opens up the industry for more participation across the board.
It's a great move. There's a quote that I use. I say this all the time on the show, but Nathan Wood from Spectrum AEC referred to the data lake versus the data sewer. And I think as you really start being intentional about how you capture and gather your data, you're far more in that data lake capacity, because you've been deliberate about it, not just in how you gather it, but what do you want to do with that data? And I think that proactive, future-focused narrative really needs to be tied into everybody's data strategy, because we all want to gather that data. We want to gather it in a way that's clean and useful and actionable. But if you haven't thought about what you want to do with it, is your stat that you shared earlier, so much of that data goes unused, and we need to correct that. And I think all of these things come together in a position to really help start solving that problem. So I appreciate that. And both of you have, touched on the concept of equitable access to data at different times. And Aaron, I'd love it if you could unpack that concept a little bit further. So can you give me some more details on what it means and the impacts of actually offering more equitable access to data across the ecosystem?
Yeah, so whether we're talking about granular entity level data, or to the other point about a more hybrid compute process, not necessarily always being tied to desktop machines, or a software product, for example, when we're talking about services, we're talking about web-enabled access, that engages everybody. It's not limited to just those people who have been learning tools for 5-10 years, the principals that used to know one product and now they're not quite sure how to engage with the next product. They can still just review and interact with it on an iPad, rather than necessarily a complicated user interface to them, because they're just not used to it.
Yeah.
Like I say, it enables everybody. It enables large firms, small firms, digitalized firms, those that are still on their journey. I think it creates an opportunity for the whole industry to find greater efficiencies in how we talk to each other, how we collaborate with each other. I think, again, coming back to my analogy about construction packages of doors. Currently, I need to make 200 drawings and schedules and a huge amount of output in order to communicate the package of information for a tender for different subcontractors. If in a scenario I am able to just provide them access to the data they need in the cloud, maybe I don't need to produce 300 drawings and schedules and so on and so forth. So we have a real opportunity to not just create equity, but also create significant efficiencies in the way in which we construct and design buildings.
Yeah, it's really a decision-making conversation then. It's like you get the data that you need at the right time, instead of, like you said, you've got to manually create all of these things or give somebody everything, and you don't necessarily want to give everybody access to every single thing too. So some ability to control that data flow also has a lot of impact on the way our businesses are operating. I just think back to when I was still a proposal manager, tender manager across the pond, and trying to find, documentations for the RFPs as I'm submitting something an hour before it's due, and I'm going 9, 10, 11 nested folders deep, and then I get in there and there's 900 documents, and I'm like, what do I need? And it was a nightmare, and I don't want to go back in time and do that again. Let me be clear. But if I had to, or if I could, I wish we could bring some of these tools that we're talking about and some of these changes in how we manage data, specifically in the cloud, because I often hear folks talk about, well, I've digitized, I've put my PDFs of my drawings on a box folder or on Google Drive or SharePoint, and everybody can access them. And it's like, well, that's a start, yes, but this is a timestamp in time. You're not actually relating with that data, you're not managing it, and there's still so many opportunities for mistakes. But when you move into these platforms and the tools that we have today, the narrative changes and shifts so much, where you're working in real time. And like, I'm being a huge nerd now, so I'm going to stop, because this isn't Eric's opine away about data, and I'll go for an hour. But I just think it introduces so much opportunity. And I'm thankful for people who have followed me, who are still doing work that I used to do when I worked at GCs, that don't have to suffer through such a painful process to get something, out and delivered, whether it's a proposal or some drawings or a variation of all of those things.
Well, a key thing that we talked about also was collaboration, and it's bi-directional, right? The job is not static, and things will change. And if you can digitize in a way that you've got the most current information, and you have a channel to get back to the author of that information, if you have any clarifications, you can streamline a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think to your point just a second ago about, digitalized, I've moved from binders of printed operational documentation for this building
Which makes me sad inside.
to a USB stick in a filing cabinet.
Yep.
That's what's happened. What we have an opportunity for is being able to ask plain language questions to find the answers that we need to tender some information or operate the building, whatever it may be. But that's only possible when we talk about this granular level of detail, collaborative data exchanged equitably across everybody.
In the equitable conversation, it even goes into such interesting nuances, like you could have Sam in estimating who deliberately sequesters his data because he feels some authority from that, or Tony in estimating who just really isn't very good at managing his files, and so they're that 97 nested folders deep. And it's even something as small as that, but also there's just a lot of intention behind that. And I think when people feel empowered and have the visibility that they need to do their jobs, it makes the whole process just feel a whole lot more equitable. And I think the collaboration piece in our industry is so key. I think I can think of few industries that have so many people and so many players and so many separate businesses that all come to the table at the same time, that need to manage all this information in real time to stay on track for schedules that they don't like very much, if we're being real. They're continuing to shrink, and it's stressful, and anything we can do to empower them to make those decisions faster without all those constraints, I think is a huge win. So I'm going down that hole again. I'm going to stop right now, but I've seen such a shift in these perceptions, and it's really something I'm appreciative of. And if I think about, our construction friends specifically, traditionally the virtual design and construction teams owned all of the IT and technology and innovative processes. And that they were kind of just the IT team that we had. That has changed so much in construction, as far as other folks are empowered to use these tools. Other folks are empowered to make decisions with data, have access to dashboarding. And I think there's a similar shift that's happening with our data. So Amy, I'd love it if you could share more about your perspective on, what it looks like when these teams, especially, in the AEC world, are effectively using that data. And I think also just, the power of a platform and aligning on that, and how it impacts your broader ecosystem. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So we hear a lot about common data environments from customers. And so that's an important step that people make as they try to get organized, because the USB stick in the drawer doesn't really count as a common data environment. And so building up a practice where, all the stakeholders, as we mentioned before, have access to what they need, with the right permissions, and they can contribute and, get their work done faster, having the most current information at their fingertips. And that goes all the way out to the job site too. So that, that amazing potential connectivity throughout the entire process is really, what we're hoping to help people achieve.
There's a feedback loop, but there's a visibility now. And I feel like the pre-construction phase is becoming even more important now. And as we're able to connect all of those folks out in the field that have such an incredible amount of knowledge back to that design phase, I think it's just such an opportunity to avoid a lot of change orders and RFIs as well, where you come back and you go, steel detailer, you are an expert in this. Here's what we're proposing. What do you think? Obviously the whole process isn't going to be fully democratic, but making sure we have the opportunity to have that conversation, I think it really maps back to what you're saying. And Aaron, I'd love to hear your perspective on that realm as well, as far as, shifting that narrative with data.
Yeah, I think, back to your first question about looking back on the successes of BIM, it initiated a collaborative culture, which we build on today. And so as data becomes more available to more parties, there's now more trust. There's more concepts of, hey, I'm going to give you something. Can you have a look at it? What do you think? And can you co-author that with me? And can we work on this together? And can we do this in a way we've never done before? Can we get early releases and early tendering of certain packages? Can we start thinking about the incredibly difficult, complex, expensive facade really early with someone who knows how to build facades?
Love this.
And that's always been 10, 15 years ago really tricky, because there were really strong walls between all those different parties. So again, back to your question, the first question about BIM successes, it started to break down those walls, create a culture of collaboration, create a culture of we're all in this together, and because we all want to try and achieve a great outcome. And I think that will continue as we now look into the brave new world of granular level of entity component data in the cloud. Everybody's more familiar with using the kind of cloud services and technology that are available. And so for sure, I think that's going to be a big part of the successes for the future.
And I think it allows us to be so much more nimble. I mean, think back to the years where it was just paper and maybe email, and that was it. If you wanted to do these innovative changes and make these improvements, you're mailing plans to somebody, you're having them print them. Like the process just wasn't fast. Like it wasn't fast and it wasn't scalable. And today, now you can segment everything and yep, here you go. Here's this piece. What do you think? Or even like you said, the early stage glimpse. Getting that information early on, it allows you to make so many impactful choices. And I think especially as we struggle with challenges with labor and talent and compressed schedules and material shortages and all of these things, the more early insight that we can offer before we get to that construction phase is going to continue to be paramount in ensuring that we're not wasting materials, that we're not doing unnecessary rework, that we're not having to do 10, 20, 30, 40 change orders because we got to the field when somebody goes, you can't build it that way, and somebody just didn't know. And so, I think we're at a moment where it's an opportunity, and that's always what I really like to lean back on when we're talking about all these different technologies. Folks sometimes are like, oh, I can't talk about more data strategy, I can't make more technology changes. But people have to understand that these are competitive differentiators now, and I don't think they're a nice to have. It's a requirement for our teams to do business successfully today, especially in the future, which I think pivots into my last three questions here. And Amy, I've got one. I think we had a lot of announcements the last day, so I think we can maybe lean on this a little bit, but I'm curious, how do you feel that AI or artificial intelligence fits into this equation for both, the future of data and broader BIM adoption, especially for the world of architecture and architects?
Well, we think about AI in a couple different ways. I'll start with augmentation because that kind of excites me. That's about, I think, helping the practitioner just do better work and explore new possibilities and leverage all of their incredible experience and have a little assistant to kind of help them. And then there's the automation of a lot of these mundane tasks. We can certainly do a better job there. And then there's a lot more analysis that we can do so that we can get to better outcomes and more analysis up front. So we can do things like industrialized construction and think about sustainable outcomes. So all these things kind of come together in my mind, to help also things become more parallel and less serial.
I think we're really at a great opportunity where we're able to be more outcomes focused, but also that augmentation. I say this all the time on Digital Builder. People look at AI and some of the AR tools and they go, oh, this is a job replacement. This is going to take this from me. And I always like to make sure folks know that that's not the case. People still are going to need to be present to do what people do well. But the more things we can automate, as you were alluding to at the start of our conversation, hours and hours spent doing tasks that are just inherently unenjoyable, and allowing people to be creative, I think it's a real opportunity. And it's an education conversation, how people understand where those tools sit and where they fit into our ecosystem, and also making sure we do a really good assessment. There's a lot of stuff. I think every tech company in the history of time in the last 6 months has gone, we have AI.
Yeah.
And some of that is real and some of it, not so much. And it's really, there's some due diligence to do to make sure that you're adopting tools that bring that to the table.
And I think one thing I'd probably add to that is I speak on behalf of pretty much everybody at my firm who would welcome the equivalent of Microsoft Clippy saying, hey, it looks like you're trying to do a fire plan. You've done thousands of them before on hundreds of projects. Let me try and help you get 80 to 90% of the way there. That's a real strong application of Amy's point about augmenting. Let's support these designers who want to be creative and want to be able to impact the world in a positive way, that maybe are not as enthused about doing something they've done hundreds of times before on multiple projects. And I really do think there's a welcoming of augmented AI.
I laughed when you said Clippy, not because I disagree with you, but yesterday I was talking to Marcus O'Brien right here, actually. He's the VP of AutoCAD, and Clippy actually came up. For one, I just learned that Clippy's coming back, apparently, which is wild to think of, because I don't have very fond memories of Clippy, to be honest, because I'm typing some report and it goes, do you want to write a cover letter? And I go, no, I don't. Please go away.
Yeah.
But he was alluding to a lot of the tools in AutoCAD and some things that are coming in the future that align to exactly what you're sharing. And it's so exciting that we're at this moment right now where the tools are here to really help. And if you don't want their help, you can go away. I don't want you. Clippy, I don't think you can minimize quickly enough sometimes. But the future is here. And I think people are talking about AI sometimes in this very idealistic state. But a lot of the technology that Autodesk has brought to the table in the last few years has already been doing a lot of these things. And everything that was announced in the last couple of days just really up-levels that. And I'm excited about it. So 2 more final questions for both of you, the ones that I ask most of our guests. And Amy, I'd love to hear, what are some of your current industry trends that you're really excited about, or any predictions you have for the next 5 to 10 years for the AEC industry?
So I'm excited about industrialized construction. That shouldn't be a big surprise. We told a great story with the Phoenix project during my keynote. And I have seen amazing projects all over the world. I'm hoping that with AI and some other work across the industry, we can get these things to scale more, because the outcomes are tremendous. So that's one. And then I'm really excited about renovation projects. We know that in the future, over half the projects, or even now, I think half of the current projects are renovations. And I was just in Australia and I saw this incredible building. It's the AMP building in Sydney. And they took it down to the core and they rebuilt it, and it looks like a brand new building. And it was such a cool, sustainable outcome.
It's incredible to see that too, and the amount of adaptive reuse that we're starting to see, where especially with historic buildings, you come in and you go, okay, let's just not rip this out. Like, what can we still use? I've had a wonderful conversation with Alma Rafat from Windover, and they did some really great things with laser scanning, where they went and scanned all these old facades and then recreated them with new technology with 3D printing. They look exactly like they did when they were built, but they're far more sustainable. They're not going to erode, and they retain all that beautiful finish from the old buildings. So that's a really cool answer. I think we're going to be continuing to head there, especially as we continue to reimagine how we're using our spaces and how people come to work and do so many different things. So I think that's great. Aaron, how about you? What trends are you bullish on right now? What are you really excited about, and where do you think we're going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, sorry to copy Amy's homework, but retrofitting buildings for sure. Specifically in London, I appreciate there'll be different regions where it's maybe less important, but every single project we tackle in central London is how much can we retain the existing building fabric. And we will spend 6 to 10 weeks on every single project looking at one end of the scale, where we minor interventions, trying to keep the building in its current form, but evaluating its applicability for another 100 years, and how does it perform in the summer and the winter, and what can we do to the other end of the scale, full demolition, et cetera, and we never land at that end of the scale anymore. There's always somewhere in the middle, through the intense evaluations that we're doing, looking at building occupancy comfort, looking at thermal performances, looking at understanding can we keep just the structure of the frame? How does that impact things like floor to ceiling heights? The greater the floor to ceiling heights, the more thermal comforts we can build in. This is every single project we're working on at the moment. And, to something I mentioned earlier, that means we've got an increased data footprint because we're going to be having a multitude of laser scans, both, before the building's available, at occupation, partial demolition, when we realize, okay, that column's not quite where we thought it was going to be. We now need to reevaluate the design. Multiple survey models, context models, engineering models, showing the existing, showing the proposed. And I think this is an amazing challenge. I think we've got the opportunity in front of us to be able to do this. I think we should be responsible to be doing that as our default position. And I definitely think that's not going away anytime soon. That is just going to become normal for everybody.
I love it. And it plays a role in just that broader sustainability narrative too. I mean, we're all very aware of the amount of waste that comes from construction, whether it is, from rework or material issues or just change conditions or the demolition that you're talking about and trying to avoid that. And so I think all of these play such a big role in the future of our industry. I didn't realize that so many of the facilities in London, granted I've not been to London, so
we have a lot of existing buildings.
Yeah. It makes sense. You've been around for a couple of years longer than maybe the West Coast on the US.
A lot of historic buildings too.
Yeah.
It's really cool. So I appreciate that perspective too. So one final question for both of you. It's a recurring question and I really enjoy asking it. Amy, what is your favorite tool or one tool that you'll bring to every project that you work on?
All right. Well, I've worked at Autodesk for 20 years and I have a lot of things with an Autodesk, AutoCAD, Revit logo on it. But about 6 years ago, we gave the AutoCAD team this multi-tool that does about, everything, screwdriver, knife, everything. And so that is always in my car and anywhere I go when we need a little safety net tool there.
I love it. So if, I break down somewhere, I know I'm going to call you and say, Amy, I need a hand. Please bring your multi-tool.
Yes.
Good to go. I like it. Aaron, how about you? What's one tool you bring to all your projects?
I am never separated from an iPad. I don't have a laptop. I don't have a desktop computer. I use an iPad every single day for absolutely everything.
Wow.
Every conversation I've had, recorded, meeting, notes, I can find everything within seconds from searching from it. If you took that away from me, I don't know what I would do.
You've just identified your kryptonite. So if any of your enemies are out here watching, they're going to slowly pull that away from you. I'm not going to take it from you, but I think it's a great answer. And it's also cool just to see the power of that tool and how it's so wide ranging for you. Because I believe most folks, they've got their iPhone or their cell phone, they've got their tablet, whatever that might be, their laptop. And the fact that you've been able to narrow on this one device that helps you, tackle anything that you're going to tackle, that's really cool. So great. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today on the show. It was a real pleasure getting to know both of you and hearing a bit more about your perspective, about the broader AEC industry. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about and excited about right now. So thank you for bringing both of your perspective to the table here today.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, aside from that, of course, I am your trusty host, Eric Thomas. If you enjoyed everything we're talking about today, you can find Digital Builder on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Autodesk Construction Cloud YouTube page. We are a video-first podcast. I am surrounded by cameras, as my guest today can attest to. But outside of that, if you'd like to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm Eric Thomas, or Builder_digital on Twitter. Without any further ado, goodbye.